From September 11th to the Great Recession, from Katrina to government shutdowns, small businesses have been battling stresses and shocks. Through grit to innovation, they have sustained local economies with their resilience. Now, they face an unprecedented threat, COVID-19. As Congress scrambles to provide aid, coronavirus economic relief packages are overlooking millions of micro-businesses. Many of these businesses are owned by people of color, veterans, immigrants, and others who operate in low and moderate income communities. During the best of times, they face hardships in gaining access to the resources needed to thrive, grow, and hire. Their remarkable innovation to provide economic freedom for their families is on full display. What will you do to support the heartbeat of the nation's economy?
Hi, welcome to week 3 of the AEO 2020 virtual conference. My name is Michaelia Davis, and I serve as the Director of Inclusive Economies at the CERTNA Foundation. I am also honored to serve as a co-chair of this year's conference alongside Melissa Bradley and Valerie Mosley. CERTNA is a private family foundation that's based in New York City, and we are also one of the sponsors for this year's conference. We're joined with a number of other institutions, including Wells Fargo, the Rockefeller Foundation, PayPal, the Kauffman Foundation, Fifth Third Bank, BB&T SunTrust, W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and several other institutions who have invested in this conversation around how we can support Black, Brown, Indigenous entrepreneurs and inclusive entrepreneurship in means that can help us rebuild an economy that works for all of us. Each week, we've had over 40,000 viewers join us in an important set of conversations that uncovered resources, tools, practices, policies, and really ideas that can help us reimagine what our economy can look like. At CERTNA, we care about building inclusive economies. We see Black and Latino and Indigenous entrepreneurs as critical to having a society and an economy that works for all. We know that 1 in 5 Black workers is employed by a Black entrepreneur, and we believe that if we can scale that as a solution, we can close the wealth gap in this country. I'm really excited to join you this week for a set of conversations on the role that philanthropy should play in investing in inclusive and diverse entrepreneurship, and how impact investing and other resources and tools can help us do the same. I hope you enjoy this week of the conference, and I look forward to seeing you online.
Thank you, Michaelia, for that wonderful welcome. And good afternoon, everyone. We hope that you've enjoyed these amazing speakers. If so, why not take the mic? We're opening the stage in our last week of the conference so that you can have a voice and share your programs and innovations around small businesses. Our conference team is putting a link, a sign up right now in our chat. Join the conversation, and we can't wait to hear the great work that you're doing.
Welcome to the What's Happening to Black Business Now panel discussion. I am Deidre Asante Muhammad and glad to be here. I'm with the NCRC, National Community Reinvestment Coalition, and as mentioned, Chief of Race, Wealth, and Community. I'm excited to talk to our all-star panel here and our all-star audience to talk about what is happening to Black businesses now. As the video just showed, we have three great panelists. We have Regina Hayward, Senior Vice President and Head of Supplier Diversity, Wells Fargo and Company. Regina, I'm so glad you could be part of this. We have Rodney Foxworth, who's Executive Director of Common Future. That long-time conversations with Rodney around entrepreneurship development. So Rodney, great to have you on. And then we have Dwayne Pender. Is that right? I want to make sure I'm pronouncing that right.
That's right.
Pender?
That's right.
Yeah, Dwayne Pender, Associate Partner of McKinsey & Company, and all of us have heard of the great work that McKinsey & Company does around economic development, racial wealth inequality, and as we're going to hear more about entrepreneurship. So great to have you on, Dwayne. So let me start off this conversation as we wait to get questions from the audience with a pretty broad question, but want to put it forth to each of you. Want you to reflect on just a piece of, how have you seen Black entrepreneurship? Because I think everything is pre-COVID and post-COVID. So what did you see as the status of Black entrepreneurship or an aspect of Black entrepreneurship pre-COVID? And what are your concerns now as we're in the midst of dealing with the COVID health crisis, but also economic crisis? And let's begin with the old adage, ladies first. And maybe we can first go to Regina Hayward, and she can talk to us about her opinion on these things.
Well, thanks so much for the opportunity to be a part of this very important conversation today. I am Regina Hayward, Senior Vice President and Head of Supplier Diversity at Wells Fargo, and I am in Charlotte, North Carolina today, and very proud to lead a team that spans the United States. When I think about the tremendous impact that COVID-19, as well as the current situations going on across our country involving racial injustices, as I think about the entirety of where we are today, it's certainly an unprecedented time. We certainly didn't forecast this for 2020, I don't believe, on any level. In all of our analytics and our data and foresight into what was going to happen this year. But when I think about Wells Fargo's commitment to supplier diversity, to business inclusion, and then specifically to Black-owned businesses, coming into 2020, certainly we had a very strong track record. We've spent over $835 million with Black-owned businesses in the past 6 years. And since I joined the company in 2014, we have had a significant focus and a strategic effort around increasing our relationships, not only with Black-owned businesses, but with diverse businesses across the board. And no category of spend is out of range. Some of our most significant relationships with Black-owned businesses are in spaces like technology, marketing and advertising, managed resources, construction, areas where we were, like many other organizations, looking at the demographic changes in the United States and really seeing very strong data that shows almost a doubling of minority-owned businesses in this country since the last census in 2012. And certainly when we think about where those businesses are growing, there's also a juxtaposition to some of our large urban areas across the country. So how do I then think about the COVID situation and its impact on Black-owned businesses? Certainly the reality that this particular healthcare crisis is impacting African-American and minority communities in an outsized way across the country. As Black-owned businesses are having to manage through disruptions within their labor force in relation to their workers. They're also having to manage through disruptions in their operations. And let's not forget the very important piece of customer retention. And so one of the ways that we have been tackling the present needs is by working directly with businesses, not only to provide vital information, but to also help them in three ways. We call it retool, recover, and restore. And that is pivoting in this moment to understand what the present needs are. We're checking in with our businesses across our supply chain and other business partners to ensure that if there are any other specific needs that we're addressing them. And I'll talk a little bit later in this conversation about ways that our Wells Fargo Foundation has really stepped up to the plate to ensure that we're providing funds, not only the funds that we're providing within our internal wheelhouse, but that we're extending dollars out to community development financial institutions and other lenders that certainly might be access points for minority businesses and Black-owned businesses across the country. And so I think just to wrap up my first response, we came into 2020 with significant progress around Black-owned businesses. And where we are right now with COVID-19 is certainly a very concerning place to be. However, I think it's also a significant opportunity for corporate America and others to step up and to, this is my word, to pivot to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our community at this time.
No, I thank you for that. And definitely want to engage more about the pivot, because I definitely think a pivot is necessary, because we've seen such inequality and not really startups of African-American businesses. African-Americans actually start businesses, a lot of them, but the idea of, are they able to maintain them? Are they able to grow? Are they able to get to the point of having staffing? So we will dive into that. Let me go to Dwayne real quick and ask for your initial thoughts on, what was the state of Black businesses pre-COVID, and then how do you see it in the midst of this COVID crisis?
Yeah. And thanks once again for this really amazing and important conversation. I think the first overarching thought is why are we having this conversation? Why does it matter? There's definitely a social justice and equity aspect, but we at McKinsey last year, we published a report saying that there's an economic and a GDP case for talking about this topic, saying that, if there was greater racial equity, closing of the racial wealth gap, that would lead to upwards of $1 to $1.5 trillion each year for the global economy. And so addressing Black businesses is not just important for Black businesses in and of itself, but it actually is really important for our broader economy and how we move forward as a country. So just wanted to state that outright. I think a couple of thoughts relative to pre-COVID and post-COVID. On the pre-COVID basis, what we saw, and I think you mentioned, is African Americans, Black people, particularly Black women, are extremely entrepreneurial, the most entrepreneurial group relative to other demographics. And so starting businesses, coming up with ideas is not, the challenge. It's actually scaling and sustaining those businesses. And that relies on the financial sector and broader knowledge and tools that the African American community may or may not have access to. And so, thought number one was at a disadvantage, not relative to their creativity and ingenuity, but relative to the scale of and the sustaining of businesses. And then when you play that forward relative to post-COVID, I think there are a few thoughts. One is the public health piece that was prior mentioned. Our community is disproportionately impacted on the health side, but also on the economic side. We are disproportionately overrepresented in the essential workers that have more contact and may become susceptible to the disease, overrepresented in the industries in terms of businesses that may have been affected by the economic shutdown. And when we think about the prior disadvantage relative to scale and sustaining, don't have the level of assets either in the business or in the community that would lead to a ability to weather an overall disruption as was COVID-19. And so in general, in a bit of a disadvantage relative to all of those things, the public health crisis, the economic crisis. I think there are a few bright spots, though, that I would say. Number one is, and we could talk about this a little bit more later, is we've just seen a tremendous ingenuity when it comes to how Black businesses have responded to this overall crisis. We did a survey of businesses across the country, and we found that Black businesses in particular were actually trying to shift their business model to serve customers in order to weather this overall crisis. So above and beyond, even what we saw pre-COVID is showing up post-COVID. The ingenuity, spirit, creativity of Black businesses is showing up even in this post-COVID environment. The question is, are they going to be able to get access to the tools and resources necessary to sustain and weather them so that they can come out on the other end and really accelerate through this crisis. So, just to summarize, really important relative to the overall economy, challenged in a pre-COVID environment, even more challenged in a post-COVID environment, but the ingenuity and creativity of Black businesses, I think, gives hope for overall acceleration in the future.
No, I thank you for that. And again, I think the points you raised about kind of the COVID situation might not have created a new situation, but kind of highlighted and dramatized some of the inequalities that already existed. And I think it's also important the way you noted how all of these pre-existing conditions, weakened pre-existing health conditions, pre-existing weak economic, whether it's employment and all these things build on each other. So let's go to Rodney to kind of wrap us up on this idea of, your analysis of where Black entrepreneurship was pre-crisis and where it is now, because I think one of the things that we need to think through is that we're not looking for recovery in the sense of going back to where we were. We want to, I think, move forward in a new direction that would, be much more advantageous for African-American businesses because they weren't prospering the way we would want them to. And as Dwayne noted, as much as is needed to make a strong American economy as a whole. So Ronnie, let's hear your thought.
Well, I appreciate being in this conversation. And Dietrich, as you said earlier, it's always great to be in conversation with you about this. And you, many, understand the situation for Black businesses prior to coronavirus. And so just want to situate the conversation there for a bit, because when you acknowledge the fact that Black businesses were quite vulnerable to something like a generational effect as coronavirus has been, in terms of not having the sort of capacity and resources and investment to be able to weather the storm, that's a structural element. And so we knew coming into the COVID situation that African-American businesses in African-American communities, for example, 90% of them had fewer than 15 days or 15 days or fewer of capital reserves. That's a structural element that's within the business system, right? And so that's something that coming into COVID was already in existence. And so when we're coming out of COVID or entering COVID, we're obviously seeing quite a bit of collapse of African-American businesses in this moment, which should not be a surprise to anyone, unfortunately. And so I think where we are, to your point, Dietrich, is quite frankly, these pre-existing conditions are showing themselves and making themselves more visible for many of us who have been in the space, but for a number of folks who have not been paying much attention to the conditions, the structural conditions that African-American-owned businesses face. And so when we look at it from that perspective, there is a way of thinking about how do we restructure versus recover? How do we not get back to 3-4 months ago in which African-American businesses were already suffering and not having an equal stake at the table? So we actually want to create new infrastructure to enable something different moving forward. And so I think that is the opportunity before us at this point. When you ask about the question about entrepreneurship, we all know that the African-American community, and thank you for illuminating particularly African-American women being incredibly entrepreneurial, creating new things and creating new businesses. So I think, I myself am bullish on that continuing. The question I think that we have to answer are the systems in place to ensure that we can actually have an equitable response that centers the needs of African-American communities, African-American businesses? And that is the question. We look at things like the Paycheck Protection Program, for example. The way that rolled out, it really doubled down on existing inequities within the Small Business Administration, right? And so for those of us who were paying attention, we knew that there was going to be an equitable rollout, because when African-American businesses are not getting the types of investment and resources from the traditional SBA programming, 7(a) guaranteed lending program, why would that change in light of COVID? And so I think what an opportunity to have is that hopefully we're able to engage in a conversation and action that will reconsider the types of responses that we need to have as it relates to African-American businesses. And so that is my hope. I think this is where we are in terms of how to restructure, how do we look at institutions, including the Federal Reserve, for example. How do we look at our institutions from a government perspective? How do we actually need to reinvent things so that we can actually put and center African-American businesses? How do we ensure that we have a more spacious amount for the community development financial institution industry to actually be much more responsive as a field for the needs of African-American businesses? How do we look at our banking infrastructure? How do we actually look at the fintech that is coming online and has been coming online for the last several years? So I think we're at this moment of reimagining and restructuring. And I think if we can focus our attention there and not try to get back to where we were 3 months ago, 4 months ago, we actually want to be more, we need to be more bold, we need to be more ambitious. We need to be able to create new structures, reinvent some structures, maybe let go of some structures as well that will really center African-American businesses.
That's great. And with that, I'm going to deviate a little bit more. I wasn't going to go, but before we get into the reimagining and restructuring, I would like to hear from others as well, their analysis of the COVID response thus far. In what effect do we think that's having on Black businesses? In what ways has it been helpful? In what ways has it reinforced the inequality that Black businesses have been dealing with for generations? Let me go back to Dwayne first, and then we'll end with Ms. Hayward. I think you're on mute.
You're right. So I think in terms of the COVID response, there are two types of responses. One is the public health response, and then the second is the economic response. On the public health response, I think the challenge has been relative to Black businesses that if you think about just the access to testing and healthcare capacity, what we find is that Black communities are more likely to be concentrated in the places that have the least amount of healthcare capacity, highest poverty rates, and also those correlate with the least amount of testing capacity. What we found is that testing actually skews to be higher income. So for a while, the people who were getting access to care were the people who were able to test positive and show that they had COVID-19. But that opportunity to be able to test positive and to show that you had the symptoms was not as relevant and or available for the Black community. And so I think the just distribution of the public health response hasn't been commensurate to the disparate impacts of the actual crisis. And so I think that has been a challenge that not only affects businesses, but the employees and the people who are running those businesses. On the economic side, I would just echo everything that was said before. There was a recognition that small businesses affected, in particular, were going to be affected. There was a recognition that the broader economy would need to shift, but there are disparate impacts on each of those things when it comes to Black businesses and Black employees in general. So just to give you an example, because of the working from home situation and because of the increased need for digitization and broadband, that has disproportionately affected Black communities because Black communities are less likely to be in areas that have high-speed broadband, high-quality broadband, and therefore are less likely to access to the broader economy that has shifted. In addition, companies are starting to digitize and automate more of their functions. And because Black workers are more likely to be in the entry-level, lower-paid support roles, those are higher on the totem pole relative to their likelihood of being automated. So just in general, I think the economic response has been more spread evenly, when in actuality, the economic impact has been disproportionately affected. So I think my overall take is that, going forward and the things that we can do more is really try to target the interventions both on the public health side and on the economic side to the places that are going to be the most affected so that we can, get back not only to baseline, but also start to rebuild and reimagine for a more equitable future.
Oh, no, that's great. I'm working on a paper with a think tank called Institute for Policy Studies, and it's titled White Supremacy as the Pre-Existing Condition. And I'm thinking of that in relation to this idea of, we keep talking about disproportionate and negative disproportionate impacts on African Americans, right? And we're all clear that's not just happenstance, that we just, again, happy to get, pick the unlucky card and be just negatively disproportionately impacted health-wise and negatively being disproportionately impacted in terms of getting loans, but that we have been in a white supremacist, racist socioeconomic system that have made us fragile in every area. And that unless policy is designed to really deal with that issue, if we just kind of continue to do what might be called a race blind approach, it has very non-blind or very race-focused impacts where it maintains inequality. But let me jump to Regina Hayward and just ask her about your analysis of the response thus far to COVID. In what ways you think it has been helpful to Black businesses? In what ways do we need more to actually get us past this kind of precondition of white supremacy and socioeconomic inequality?
So when we think about the steps and the actions that have been taken since COVID to address the economy and to address the needs that businesses have for access to capital, and this is really mind-blowing, that the total stimulus for COVID-19 crisis has already tripled that for the entire 2008 to 2009 recession. And just to put that into perspective, we know about the dollars that have been certainly allocated through PPP and Main Street programs and other significant programs to really help firm up and to shore up the economy. But what I have seen that's really critical, and this gets back to some of the comments that have been made, are the dependencies within our economy and how you can't just focus narrowly in one specific area to the neglect of other areas that are suffering. We've really got to now think about how to come at a response from a holistic, integrated perspective. And what I'm talking about is if you simply look at, access to capital and you miss the fact that there are disparities in healthcare, disparities in education, that the criminal justice system right now is in dire need of reform, that from a policy perspective, we're looking at what are the policies going forward going to be in the United States and how will those impact the individual's ability to be successful and thus be a successful business owner at some point in their life. And so I think what we're recognizing is that you can't just have one program and think that that particular effort is going to get us there from the standpoint of the holistic need. We have to begin to look at the entire system and deconstruct that system in a way that provides an opportunity for everyone to have a shot to succeed. And if that means you want to go in the direction of an entrepreneur, then that's a path that should be cleared for you to do so. But it's very difficult to do that if you're having housing issues, if you don't have access to healthcare, if your educational resources have been muted or are inferior for the needs of the present economy. And so that's one thing that I'm really leading on right now and really leaning into is we've got to think about a holistic kind of 360-degree approach to this. And we can't just take one small sliver and say, if we do this, maybe it's grants, maybe it's something that is certainly aligned with the values of the organization. But we're just at a point where one thing alone doesn't change what I think we have to tackle, and that's an overall system that has been constructed that is very, very difficult to migrate for Blacks and African Americans.
No, I think you're speaking right to the moment. There's a lot of conversation now around systemic racism, structural racism, and I think what we've seen over the last couple months, with first COVID crisis, everybody's scared, what have you, then it starts coming out. Well, they're having disproportionate impacts health-wise on African Americans. We start focusing more on the economic impact of COVID. And then again, there's a disproportionate negative economic impact on African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, many communities of color. And then we have this kind of post-George Floyd, though obviously it's not just George Floyd, but kind of George Floyd really kind of brought together all of the anger and hurt that's been happening around issues of police brutality. And I think one of the most fascinating things in this post-George Floyd moment is it's not just focused on police brutality, but I hear a lot, I've heard conversations about the need to support Black business. For a lot of people, that would be, well, why would police brutality mean we need to support Black business? But I think there is, as you were saying, Regina, a recognition of systemic inequality and that we can't just stop having police do chokeholds, right? There's a chokehold on Blacks' economy, or as Reverend Sharpton was saying, there's a figurative knee on Black people's necks, and throughout a whole bunch of different socioeconomic indicators. So how do we lift up those collective knees off our necks? So let me ask you people's comments about, because I do find it interesting that there's a broader conversation around supporting Black business, individuals supporting Black business. Do you see opportunities to make that something substantive once we move beyond that as the hot talking point? Do you think there's been an opportunity to strengthen Black businesses through this conversation? And also note, I think one interesting thing is I'm hearing more. I mean, I've heard for a long time in the Black community the need to support Black businesses, but I'm hearing more and more from whites who want to consider themselves allies that we need to support Black businesses. And to me, that's a little bit of a different point than I've seen in the past. So let me get your comments on this. Let's start with Rodney this time.
Yeah, and I appreciate the question. And I think one of the ways I would try to frame it out is how do we invest in as well? Because I think in this moment, there's almost a very charitable mindset. And I wanted to harken back to some of the comments that were made by some of the other folks in the panel about this is actually an economic imperative collectively as well. And so I just want to make sure that we frame the conversation in a way that is also looking at it from the economic justice perspective as much as it is from this sort of this moment that people are really energized by and looking at it as charity. And so even unpacking the question around defund police brutality, it opens up a conversation for us to look at, for example, how do states and municipalities leverage their budgets in support of particular things. So, for example, Diedrich, if we were to look at things like tax increment financing or pilots that are implemented in places like Chicago, Baltimore, many places across the country, the reality is those tax abatements disproportionately benefit folks that are not Black-owned businesses, right? And so there's a whole apparatus outside of the way that we traditionally think about banking and other instruments, but actually even how our municipalities and states are defining, leveraging their budgets to support a certain type of business versus others. And so I think the linking in the opportunity, looking at reassessing what local and state budgets look like in terms of police brutality and defunding police, it offers a window for us to actually think about other ways that we can invest into African-American business ownership, that we can provide tax incentives in ways that have not been leveraged in support and investment of African-American businesses. So I think there is a moment that we need to lean into. I do have some concerns, Diedrich, that to your point, that while there are more and more people talking about linking, ownership of Black businesses within this moment of racial justice, I will say, though, in the world that I operate in as well, it does seem that there's still much more attention on the broader set of issues, which we need to do. And I think we do need to have a stronger framing of the importance of investing in Black-owned businesses at this point. So I'm not quite sure I share the same level of optimism in terms of where the conversation is going. But I do think if we can frame things out, we actually can lead around this and ensure that we can capitalize upon the moment to redirect government resources. We can redirect private capital to ensure that we're investing in Black businesses.
That's great. And realism approach is always appreciated. And, though I think I've heard a decent amount of conversation about the need to support Black businesses, I haven't seen any studies that show that actual more dollars are flowing into them, right? So there's conversations and there's actual money. And obviously Black businesses can't run on conversation, but they need actual money coming in. So let me go to Regina and get her response, her thoughts on these conversations around the need to start Black businesses, not to start, but to invest in Black businesses. Do we think that's a positive sign? And I think we can also move not just to the individual level, but from the corporate level. I'm hearing more and more corporations talk about their need to look at their diversity and inclusion policies, which also, of course, have to include procurement policies. And that's one of the most important things for Black businesses. There's so much money in private procurement and in government procurement. But I think, Regina, you're probably well positioned to talk more about the corporate procurement. So love to hear your response.
And you used a word that I want to really highlight here, and that was your use of the word allies. This is a point in time where we can't go it just in one community or in one diverse segment. We need all hands on deck to move forward and to really make the massive changes that have to be made. And I'm very thankful for Wells Fargo's CEO, Charlie Scharf, who has really come in to our organization and set some bold initiatives and a bold vision for us around diversity and inclusion. And how that translates into work that I'm doing, and my team knows this very well, I'm the type of person that I'm looking for 100% participation in all of the areas where there is a dollar going out the door that could benefit the community. And there are places where historically African Americans and other minority groups have not been participants from an economic inclusion perspective. One of those key areas that I'll just share with the group on this call is the asset management area in the wealth and investment management space. The House Financial Services Committee and other congressional organizations have really been working and looking very closely at assets under management across the United States, over 70 trillion in assets under management. Yet less than 1.3% are handled by minority or women-owned asset management firms. That's absolutely ridiculous. And we have an opportunity to really look at that and to shift it forward and to ensure that we have full inclusion. And when you start really digging into a very specific area like that, what you find are the jobs that are created as private equity firms are out working very closely and in partnership with organizations. You also have some similar multiplier effects in other asset classes and other asset manager type classes, whether it's hedge funds or real estate firms or even firms that are delving into mutual funds. And so I think what we have to do is we really have to challenge ourselves to understand what the new economy looks like. And one of my fellow panelists kind of mentioned this at the front of the call. And we've got to skate to where the puck is going. Certainly, we have built supplier diversity over the years in some very niche areas like construction, like marketing, like managed resources. But when we think about what the future economy is going to look like, technology, software, and hardware, asset management, professional services, consulting type services, law firms, those are places where we've got to be really honest with ourselves about the level of participation from a Black and minority-owned business perspective. And then we've got to dig inside of those categories and invest in capacity building and invest in development. My team runs about $3 million of capacity building programs each year. Those are grant-based programs where we will send a diverse business owner to major universities. We partner with historically Black colleges and universities to provide scholarships for students going through supply chain management programs and construction management programs. We certainly work very closely with our Wells Fargo Foundation that extends over $400 million a year in philanthropy, $115 million of which goes to philanthropic efforts led by African American and Black-led nonprofits. And so when we think about full economic participation, the first thing I think is we have to be honest with ourselves about where the systemic influences and systemic racism have really precluded full participation from everybody within the United States. And then we have to set really aggressive goals. And this is where the allies come in, allies who will help to move the work forward, help to sponsor the work, help to make sure we have resources to do the work. And then lastly, we got to hold ourselves accountable. We have to just tell the truth about where our organizations are, hold ourselves accountable, and know that as we are making progress, we're going to see corresponding progress across the United States. And I think that's really the end goal here, to have an economy with full participation, with full innovation, creativity coming in from all different directions. And ultimately, I've been listening a lot to just podcasts and information as we've gone through the past few weeks. You know, that whole notion of pursuit of happiness, that rings deep to me when I think about the pursuit of happiness. At the end of the day, we should all have an opportunity to really pursue happiness to the fullest extent. And I think we can't do that until we have an economy where everybody has an opportunity to succeed.
No, I think that's great. And I think you're absolutely right that it's hard to pursue happiness if there's not some type of economic, sustainable foundation underlying you. We are running out of time. So I'm going to take that as your concluding comments, Regina, because they were so good. And we will now go to Dwayne for concluding comments. One question, I'm looking down at my phone because that's where I'm getting the questions from the audience. There was a question, particularly from McKinsey. Are there certain industries that we should focus on investment right now to reach Black businesses? And there are a couple other questions. Just again, what does supplier diversity procurement opportunities look like in this COVID world? So I'm going to Dwayne, then we'll end with Rodney. And just you have like 30, 45 seconds, Dwayne.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. I think there's a couple thoughts. One is if you look at the pre-George Floyd situation, wasn't great for inclusion and diversity just because people tend to pull back on diversity initiatives. And we saw one survey that showed that almost over a quarter of businesses actually put all their inclusion and diversity initiatives on pause because of the pandemic. So I think post George Floyd in this moment, I think people are starting to think more critically about the overall policies. And even McKinsey is doing the same thing. We announced 10 actions, one of which is really looking at our supplier diversity and being way more thoughtful about who we engage in the overall pipeline. I think the second thought is, in terms of how to help in this moment, I'm seeing two types of actions. One is individual and the other is systemic. I don't think it's sufficient for people to say, I went to one bookstore and bought one book and therefore my job is done. Like, we need sustained systemic action. And so really looking at the entire pipeline and saying, how can my company, how can myself as a leader, how can my overall organization, really lead it and push? And so just to answer the question in specificity, the places where Black businesses in particular are overrepresented are, accommodations and food services, retail, and healthcare. Healthcare, I think, has grown, but retail and accommodation food services, I think, are the places that have been the hardest hit because of shutting down of restaurants and shutting down of stores. And so if there are Black businesses in your neighborhood, I don't think it's sufficient to go there once, but actually change your overall shopping habits to make that the main place that you go for whatever items and goods and services that you can, especially given Black businesses are going to need that capital the most to get back on the upswing. So really, really important topic, especially in this moment, but not sufficient for individual actions, really need broad systemic actions over time.
And I think a very important point, during crisis, this is not the time to pull back on supplier diversity, but it's a time to dive in with a greater focus. So Rodney, why don't you close this out with your closing comment?
Yes, what I would like to just make sure that we're thinking about is actually reimagining and restructuring. I think, Diedrich, to your point earlier, we cannot go back to where we were 3-4 months ago. And so I would challenge all of us at a systems level to think about what are some of the shifts that we need to be able to make and demands that we need to make at a policy level, whether it's at the SBA, whether it's actually restructuring some things at the Federal Reserve. Those are things that we need to be considering. We need to be thinking about at the local and state level, what are opportunities to disrupt the flow of investment of budgets, which are going to be disrupted themselves in the next, are happening. So this is an opportunity for us to really be able to organize and have some really thoughtful considerations at the state and local level of investments that really will enable African-American businesses to be successful, not only in 2020, 2021, but much over the long course. And I think also, finally, I think there's some opportunity for us to reconsider how we even think about business formation. What are some new capital formations that can actually be much more centering to the needs of African Americans and really consider the historic impact of systemic racism and how that has over time and continues to adversely impact African American businesses. So I think this is the moment that we can do that. I just challenge us to consider not to go back to where we were, but to actually push forward and be ambitious in this moment.
Oh, great. I want to thank again this great panel of Regina Howard, Senior Vice President, Head of Supply Diversity, Wells Fargo and Company, Rodney Foxworth, Executive Director of Common Future, and Dwayne Pender, Associate Partner of McKinsey and Company. And thank you all, the audience, for putting forth so many great questions. Sorry, I didn't get a chance to get to all of them, but I think we hit most of the main subjects. And now I'm going to hand it back to the internet world. I don't know how this works, how I switch it over, but I'm assuming at some point we will just disappear. So thank you all for participating in this forum.
Thank you.
Today's an exciting day at the AEO conference. At the end of our sessions today, we're hosting happy hour. Now, in order to participate in happy hour, you want to be in our VIP platform. If you haven't done so, register by going to aeoworks.org and select conferences. At 4 p.m., our main stage sessions will come to an end and you'll have 2 opportunities to network. 1, leave the stage and select sessions on the left-hand side and pick your bar of choice. They won't even card you. Option 2, want to spice things up? Select the networking tab and you'll be randomly paired with another conference attendee and have 10 minutes of speed networking. Now, many of you have been wondering, what do you bring to a virtual happy hour? Well, I've got you covered. Start with your glasses. Maybe a martini, maybe champagne flute. 2, pick your beverage of choice. Something bubbly, something flat, maybe even something bougie. Or mix it up. 3, decide what you're gonna wear. I think I'm going for conference black this week. 4, bring your Instapot. Oh wait, that's only if you actually win the Instapot this week or today in the VIP chat room. But how am I gonna get it to you? Maybe scratch the Instapot. But above all, have a great time, solve all of the world's problems, or at least the US, and we're good. Well, that's all I got, folks. So now over to Fifth Third for an inspiring message.
I'm Bina Elliott, and I'm Chief Corporate Community and Economic Development Officer for Fifth Third Bank. So a Fifth Third Better for me means how do we demonstrate every day, every customer, every community, every small business, a Fifth Third Better? How do we interact and serve them in a way that's honest and authentic and make their lives better, whether it's around their financial well-being or providing access to capital for a small business owner or actually helping revitalize a community. It's what can we do every day to make it better for our customers and our clients and our communities.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me share a few thoughts with you. I'd like to start by thanking Connie and the AEO team for your support and partnership with PayPal. It means a tremendous amount to us. And frankly, we couldn't have done what we're hoping to do without your counsel. All of us are so inspired by the work you do to support entrepreneurs, micro and small businesses, and local communities. This has been a difficult and emotional time for all of us, and really a painful and devastating time for Black-owned businesses. COVID-19 has only made those issues worse. I think all of you know better even than I do that 90% of small businesses in majority Black communities hold cash reserves of less than 14 days. And that makes them particularly vulnerable during this period where their customers are staying at home. Black owners are denied loans at 2 times the rate of white owners. And it's especially difficult at this time to get a loan when they most need it. And finally, Black-owned businesses have been hit especially hard by COVID-19, with some 41% closed between February and April, which is nearly double the national average. These trends are having a devastating impact on communities that for far too long have faced deep-seated injustice and systemic racism that has led to an increasing racial wealth gap. There's so much progress to be made here, and PayPal is committed to doing its part to help drive change. I'm thrilled to work with you to help deliver the PayPal Empowerment Grants for Black businesses, which will provide $10 million in emergency grants to those impacted by COVID-19 or the civil rights protests that are currently going on. The response so far has been overwhelming. As you know, we've received over 50,000 applicants in the last 2 days, and clearly we are going to help many entrepreneurs and small business owners and their communities and neighborhoods in which they operate their businesses in. As you know, we are also putting an additional $5 million to work with nonprofits across the country to support and empower Black-owned businesses in the communities in which they live. And finally, we are creating a $500 million economic opportunity fund to support and strengthen Black and minority-owned businesses in the communities they live in, and we intend to do that over the long term. I hope that we can inspire others to step up their commitments so that the business community and the nonprofit community can rise up to promote, to drive social justice and racial equality. I want to thank all of you at AEO for your help, for your guidance, for your support. As I mentioned up front, we wouldn't be here and couldn't have devised a program like that without all of your input. So thank you, and we look forward to even doing more together. Take care and have a great rest of the day.
Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning to our West Coast folks. I am Tracy Jarman. I'm Chief of Staff with CapEQ, and we're a firm that advises investors and businesses to achieve superior financial returns in addition to social returns. I'm also a partner in the Path to 1555 initiative to close the racial wealth gaps by growing Black businesses. I'm really excited to be here with you this afternoon. This afternoon's discussion, I'd like to make a brief moderator's amendment to the title that you saw on the screen. Bold Actions to Rescue Black Business Owners. I want to be clear that Black business owners do not need to be rescued. What many of us have known for a long time, and what has become more clear with the events of the past several months, is that Black business owners need us to meaningfully address the systemic structural barriers that are preventing their growth and success. So for today's conversation, we're going to imagine the world that we wish for and think about how we make that happen for Black businesses. I am incredibly excited to be joined by 4 panelists who represent leaders across the field who are thinking about this very topic. You know, in terms of the recent statistics say that 35% of Black-owned businesses will not recover post this pandemic recession. And so we can't just rescue, we've got to reimagine. And so I'm really excited about having Stephanie Thomas from Impact America Fund, Travis Holloway of Solo Funds, Kelly Burton of Founders of Color, and Akuna Cook of Third Way joining us this afternoon. I'll start by moderating the discussion amongst our panelists, and then we'll have a brief Q&A. So if anything you would like to ask of our panelists or discuss, please go ahead and type those into the chat, and we look forward to discussing them later in our conversation. So with that, I'd like to have each of our panelists introduce themselves and share a little bit about their work. Stephanie, would you kick us off?
Yes, happy to. So I'm Stephanie Thomas. I represent Impact America Fund. We are set up as a traditional venture capital fund that works with entrepreneurs who are growing, very sort of scalable, high growth businesses in large markets, but that also are really committed to how those particular models are benefiting communities of color. We like to think about our work as sort of the future of business when capital meets community. And so while we want the work that we do in terms of investing in these very innovative early stage companies to impact the nation more broadly, we are starting with an approach that really centers thinking and the innovation itself with Black communities in mind. And so, with our work, we launched in 2014. We've grown to over 2 portfolios with investments in each that really reflect that mission. And I'm happy to be here today to share more of that with you.
It's like we're not able to hear Travis. So Travis will come back to you in just a moment. Kelly, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I have to tell you, Tracy, when you were talking about the rescue part, I was over here snapping. You can see it, but I was over here snapping. I think that was spot on. I am Kelly Burton. I am the founder of Founders of Color, a national community dedicated to helping minority small businesses to grow and scale. Specifically, we are concerned with closing what we call the small business growth gap. We're getting a little bit of feedback. To close the small business growth gap, because what we know is that white-led firms generate about 10 times the revenue of Black firms and 8 times the revenue of Latino firms. And so while there's a lot of conversation around the wealth gap, what we know is wealth is generated one of 2 ways, right? Through inheritance or through entrepreneurship. And so if Black and brown folks are truly going to catch up, entrepreneurship has to be the primary vehicle. And so we're all about helping our members to grow and scale their businesses. In addition to that, I'm the founder of Nexus Research Group, a social impact consulting firm that's been around since 2009, where we work with foundations, nonprofits, government agencies, and support them in doing good work in the world. Excited to be on the panel today.
Thank you, Kelly. Akuna, would you like to introduce yourself?
So my name is Akuna Cook, and I am principal consultant and founder of Drake Road Strategies, where we advise individuals and organizations on public policy strategies and impact. I'm also a senior fellow at Third Way, which is a Washington, D.C. based think tank where I focus on a range of issues affecting communities of color, including and especially economically. So small business development, entrepreneurship, access to capital, those are some of the issues that we focus on. And so I'm excited to be here today and talking with all of you.
Thanks, Travis.
Yes, my name is Travis Holloway. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Solo Funds. Solo is a mobile lending exchange created to connect individual lenders to individual borrowers in an effort to provide more affordable access to small dollar loans under $1,000. I mean, as many of you know, obviously people are being significantly impacted in a negative fashion due to COVID and the global pandemic. But what many people don't know is that 78% of the country was living paycheck to paycheck, and over 40% of the country didn't have access to just $400 in emergency cash funds prior to COVID. So with that said, you know, the economy was already in a situation where, you know, more affordable access to small dollar loans was necessary. And we're seeing that only continue to increase right now. So, you know, Solo is really excited to be able to be in a position to fill the gap for these individuals who need this capital.
Thanks, Travis. Thanks, everyone. So let's dive right in. So the first question is, what is your vision, your bold vision for a future where Black businesses can thrive, grow, and reinvest in their communities? Anyone can answer.
Well, I'll go first. I first want to say that I appreciate the question because I think we spend a lot of time talking about the state of Black-owned businesses and not enough time talking about the future. And I think we have an opportunity to vision the future and essentially like reverse engineer back into that. And so I see a future where Black businesses are growing, they are healthy, they are viable, they are scaled, they are sustainable, they are spinning off jobs left and right. They are exiting and also acquiring other businesses. They are reinvesting back into their community. I think all of that is so possible, and it's possible within our generation, right, in our lifetimes. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that our ecosystem currently has the sorts of programs, initiatives, products activated that will enable us to really manifest that bright future. We wanted to get a better handle on this last year, and so we decided that we were going to do a deep dive. We launched a report called Disrupt This: Why Minority Entrepreneurship is Stuck and What Needs to Happen Next. And the purpose behind that report was we really wanted to get a better understanding of the lay of the land as it relates to the programs and services that exist to support minority entrepreneurs. If you're interested in the full report, you can find it on our website, foundersofcolor.org.com. It'll all redirect you to the same destination, and you can pull down the full report and the executive summary. And there were a lot of findings to come out of that report. But the big one is that the ecosystem that currently exists to support minority entrepreneurs is not really wired for their success. One of our big learnings and insights was that supplier diversity, for instance, which is the primary means by which Black and Brown entrepreneurs access large-size contracts from corporations and government, the program, the system is fundamentally broken. And if we are going to accomplish or achieve that bright future, we have to have a conversation about not how we fix it, because I think it's beyond that, but essentially about how we like overhaul it. And I think we probably about 90% of what we need in order to achieve that future does not currently exist in our system. And so I'll leave it there. But I think it's possible. That said, we have a lot of strategic work to do.
Yeah, I agree with Kelly. I think that there's definitely a lot of work to do. You know, to borrow from Dickens, I think we are in the best of times and the worst of times. We've got twin racial justice crises happening right now. So first, COVID-19, which really just exposed all of this economic disparities, health disparities that affect the Black community. But COVID-19 also is wiping out a lot of small businesses, disproportionately Black businesses. And at the same time, we've just seen the largest transfer of wealth, if not the largest, certainly one of the largest transfers of wealth in history, mainly to large businesses, wealthy individuals, generally white. We know that 90% of Black businesses will never benefit from the recovery funds that were doled out, certainly not in the first few rounds. And so We also are at this moment, because of the racial justice crisis around police violence, where we are reimagining a lot of systems, and has prompted companies, all kinds of institutions to really at least give a statement of support, but many have actually stepped up and are really doing some introspection around, how their boards are made up and their senior leadership teams, and whether they can do more to support Black communities. And so, based on that, and this, I think acknowledgement across the board that yes, Black lives do matter. I do believe that it's possible that we can imagine a world where Black people and therefore Black communities and Black businesses are healthy and thriving, productive, and prosperous. And so I do believe, I agree with Kelly that a lot of what we need isn't there, and we need to imagine and create them. But I think that we have a space that we could take this opportunity to start to bring that vision to life.
And I want to jump into what Akuna said, as well as Kelly, about taking the opportunity and having that space. I believe, and we believe at Impact America Fund, that this is the right time to do that. And our approach is through a venture capital model, but it really applies more broadly in terms of our philosophy around how do we go from building Black businesses that are building for rescue to actually building for resilience. And that resiliency comes in the work that is done, in our community, where we think about what does the infrastructure look like to support this future, this reimagined, bold vision that we have in mind for ourselves and our communities and our businesses. And I don't want to steal your thunder, Tracy, but Pathway to 1555 really is an example of that, I believe, because you're taking something that is very laser focused on employment and the ability of Black businesses to employ folks from the community, and how that compounds over time to create a lot of jobs for folks, but also have a significant impact on GDP and the economy overall. So we have to be thinking at that large scale. I also think it reflects what Travis is doing with solo funds in terms of how do we take the middleman out of sort of the payday lending system, right, and reimagine it with technology, making it a true peer-to-peer marketplace that really aggregates sort of what the resources are in our community when you have this digital, location that people can go to, whether they're a lender or whether they are a borrower, and they can actually negotiate on their own terms. And so I think, we need this sort of coalition building and community building, but it really needs to be around infrastructure and sort of those building blocks that will allow us to realize that future that we hold for ourselves.
That's great. Thank you, Stephanie. I'll just jump in on that. Because I'd love to share a little bit about Path to 1555. So you all are hearing it here first. This is our first time publicly talking about this work. It's a partnership between my organization, CAPEQ, the Certina Foundation, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, the Brookings Institution, and Impact America Fund. And it's really inspired by AEO's Tapestry report, which found that if 15% of Black business owners achieve employment parity by hiring at least one employee, it would yield 600,000 jobs and add $55 billion to the economy. This is ambitious, but it's also attainable and measurable, but we know we can't get there alone. There's a lot of different efforts. Working in isolation. So this is a collaborative effort, and we're calling on all government agencies, nonprofit organizations, financial institutions, and investors to join us in aligning our efforts to break down the systemic barriers that will channel more resources to support Black businesses. And so if you're interested, please check out our website, pathto1555.org. So yeah, I think that's a great transition to, we've talked about, we don't necessarily have everything that we need for this future that we envision, but I'd love to hear a little bit about what you guys are doing in your work now that is helping us to move towards that vision. And so, Travis, I want to ask you first, tell us a little bit more about your work and how it's helping us to move towards that bold vision.
Yeah, absolutely. I just have two quick things on the last on kind of the last question. Two, first point is, one, I think we need more people having awareness of Black businesses and being able to support those Black businesses. But two, I really think the root of the issue is more infrastructure around supporting those businesses, making sure that they can get loans, making sure that they can get access to capital that they do need. One of the things that I found most troubling is that 95% of Black-owned businesses didn't have more than a 14-day cash buffer. And when you looked at the impact of COVID and how long businesses had to go without, obviously the majority of Black businesses are going to struggle. In comparison, that's 2.3% in relation to Asian-owned companies. So it is a huge disparity when you look at 95% versus 2.3% that have more than a 14-day cash buffer. But that infrastructure piece, I think, is critically important. The work that Solo is doing, I think, is extremely valuable to the community. As of yesterday, we just announced a partnership with Kiva. Primarily because Kiva offers small business loans. Solo was offering personal loans. And what we were seeing on both sides is that, due to the effects of COVID, a significant number of people were going to Kiva and asking them for personal loans, but they're not in the business of offering those loans. So they were looking for, who they could actually refer those people to get access to equitable capital and not predatory lending. And Solo fit the bill. On the flip side of that, at Solo, what we're seeing is that, people who may have been laid off from, Macy's because retail was closed, or maybe they were laid off or furloughed from their employer. These people oftentimes have small businesses on the side, whether they sell T-shirts on Etsy, whether they run a food truck on the weekends, or, maybe they have some, delivery service that they might be operating as well. And we knew that we needed to be able to get them access to loans larger than $1,000. And we just felt like that mixture or combination between Kiva and Solo made a lot of sense, because we can solve both personal and professional, or call it business-related needs. In short, we've seen the need for these small dollar loans increase dramatically since COVID. And, our growth has been insane during this time. And I would say that there's a little bit of a uneasy feeling that, how many people actually need access to these loans, but it's very fulfilling to realize that these people are no longer going to pay an average of 400% interest rates for these loans.
Thanks, Travis. Lacuna, would love to hear from you from a policy perspective. What sorts of things are in place that are moving us towards this vision?
Sure. So there are a lot of initiatives. So I think two things. One, recognizing that in order to get closer to this world that we're imagining, we do need a much friendlier policy landscape. And so a bit of my work is helping us to get to a much better, more Black business-friendly policy and political landscape. But I want to talk about a couple of ideas that that Third Way, but also other, legislators and others have put forward that I think can really be helpful and need to be amplified at this time. So we know that access to capital is a huge issue for Black business owners. And one of the things that contributes to that is the lack of credit score system reform. One of the ideas that Joe Biden's campaign has put forward, and that many of us in the policy space agree with, is this a new public credit scoring system that could be housed within the Consumer Financial Protection Agency. And this is really important because we have seen, and studies have shown, that there is a bias that exists within the current credit scoring systems. There's a lack of transparency. And so by doing things like diversifying the sources of data that a credit scoring agency could take in, it could help to make much more, increase the credit scores and make them much more, Black business owners much more eligible for loans. Apprenticeships. So this is one of the things that I think is really exciting, and that I hope that no matter who the next president is, that Congress takes this up. So there's already a proposal on the table for a National Apprenticeship Act of 2020, which would be the first update since the original National Apprenticeship Act was passed in 1937. The goal would be to create 1 million new apprenticeships, create innovation hubs, and fund apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs. So why is this important? We know that a lot of Black businesses are based on skills and trades that are learned through apprenticeships. But our community has traditionally been left out of a lot of these apprenticeship programs, particularly the high quality ones. And so a focus on creating high quality apprenticeships in the traditional, building trades, beauty shops, barbershops, but also in the industries of the future, energy, healthcare, green jobs, financial services, creating the future entrepreneurs by giving them these skills and giving them the ability to then start their own businesses once they have been trained and being paid while they're being trained. Then there are a couple of other things. An opportunity fund. This is an idea that we had been working on for quite some time, but with COVID-19, it's accelerated a bit. So this is the idea that you have these funds, $60 billion funds, for example, that could be used to invest in Black founders and Black entrepreneurs within innovation hubs. Because what we have seen in the 4 metropolitan areas that have 80% of venture capital funding, so Silicon Valley, Los Angeles, Boston, and New York, is that it helps to have a hub that includes a major research universities, that includes other entrepreneurs. And so by partnering, or rather by putting together both investments in Black people, Black founders, with a place-based approach, you can create a hub of innovation and really foster a lot of Black businesses and entrepreneurs that way. And so I'll stop there.
I think that's a great place to kick it over to Stephanie. Venture capital and the capital landscape. What's going on there?
Yeah, when I think about sort of what's happening right now, as we work towards that bold vision and future, I also think about changes in sort of the trajectory of Black businesses. And so 2 ways I think about it. One is around, the pace of growth, right? So there are, this doesn't apply to every Black business, of course, and even beyond Black businesses, just most businesses aren't going to be applicable. But when you think about within Black business, the opportunity for a certain class of entrepreneurs to scale rapidly and to be able to do things within a 5 to 7 year time period, that could really transform markets and really impact lives. That is a space that we're playing in, and that's how we're thinking about our capital allocation to these particular companies. But it also touches on, if you're able to grow a select number of companies quickly in this way, what does that mean for the ability to create jobs, the ability to have, that management team and that entrepreneur realize, new forms of wealth that can allow them to reinvest, to also take what they've learned from building in that way and paying it forward to the next wave of entrepreneurs that come behind them, right? And then from there, it's not just about pace of growth, it's also about what is the true value of a Black business, right? And realizing that in the markets, when these companies are able to be successful with growing their revenue, with growing their staff, with building out a base of customers that really see the value proposition and want to continue to work with this organization. And that's something that really is, doesn't get talked about a lot, but is really fundamental to that bigger vision, is how we are valued. And how that value is perceived in markets. And so, if we as venture capitalists, and I say we, I mean Impact America Fund, I mean, a lot of other investors that are doing this work, and even folks, in the broader sort of startup ecosystem, if we're able to prove that out, to show that, that can mean, tremendous impact in terms of returns to the actual community, to being able to actually start to create wealth and to also empower people to start working on wealth building activities. And I'm not saying it necessarily has to just be within this lane of high growth tech-based entrepreneurship, but that is one piece of it. That is one slice, and that's one way that we want to prove that, on this trajectory, Black businesses can overcome some of these hurdles around systemic racism and the things that keep our communities sort of entrenched in certain ways and not able to realize our full dream. So, that is our goal. That's our philosophy. And that's just one thing I wanted to highlight as well as we think about overall systems change.
And Kelly, from a technical assistance and support perspective, what are you seeing as bold actions going on right now?
At Founders of Color, we approach it through 3 different veins. The first is thought leadership. It's incredibly important for us to have the hard conversations. We don't mind having the hard conversations. That's actually our niche and our jam. And so we think it's important to have these hard conversations because there needs to be greater accountability in this space, greater transparency, greater iteration, greater learning. And if we're not addressing the difficult topics and having the hard conversations, then it's very difficult for us to iterate and grow. And so thought leadership is first. And second, it's through our programming. So at Founders of Color, much of our programming has paused in light of COVID-19. But our sweet spot is really working with entrepreneurs who are generating revenue. They're probably in the 5-6 figures, but they are stuck in the solopreneur trap. So 95% of Black-owned businesses have no employees. So that means 95% are solopreneurs. So we work with those who have tremendous potential, but just don't necessarily know how they build an operation that enables them to step out of the role as solopreneur and really become the CEO of that business and play one function versus many, many functions as a kind of chief everything officer. So it's the thought leadership, it's the programming, and it's the advocacy. And that's where we're really leaning in on this moment, particularly as it relates to coalition building. And so I'm co-convening a space of Black leaders in the Black tech, Black entrepreneurship ecosystem, because we realize that if we're going to see the sort of transformation that we desire in our ecosystem, we're going to have to find our collective voice and we're going to have to find our collective power. And so for me, the advocacy part is incredibly important. And I think it's going to be a huge part of the future of the broader ecosystem.
Yes.
So we've talked about this bold vision and these bold actions that we're all doing here in this virtual room. What can our audience members do to help to move towards this bold vision?
Well, I can start and just say, I think we all, everyone who's listening in, we're all participating in one of the most important elections of our lifetimes. And so I think obviously being focused on the fact that whoever becomes the next president, but also at your state and local level, that those people who we're going to be potentially electing in November are going to have a huge role to play in what the recovery looks like for small businesses around the country. And so at a minimum, being engaged at a civic level. But the other thing I think is using your sphere of influence to shift the way that we think about what recovery and resilience and assistance in the small in the entrepreneurship space looks like. And so, for example, thinking about an emphasis on investing in people. For example, thinking about the future of work, thinking about how issues around the criminal justice system really affect small business. For example, we know that a lot of folks who are returning home, that they are, they already have a lot of entrepreneurial drive and ambition, and really just need some of the barriers that we have put up in front of them, that makes it difficult for them to attain things like financing and housing and support. And so rethinking the framework that we think about punishment and crime in this country, and what it means for folks who are coming home after serving sentences, that they still have a lot to contribute to our communities, and really being mindful of that we are not perpetuating the disparities in the system by excluding them. And then the last thing is really about networks, right? So, there's a saying that I've seen over and over that your network is your net worth. What does that mean in a world where 75% of white people don't have any non-white friends, or where the average white person's network is 1% Black, right? And so we have to think more expansively about building networks of folks who are not in our immediate educational circles or socioeconomic circles, because for those of us who do have access and an ability to really tap into broader networks, we need to think about those who are not, because of the way that our society is set up. We're still very much a segregated society. And so we just need to be mindful and thinking outside the box a bit in the way that we approach solving some of these problems.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on that. I co-sign 100%. Instead of thinking outside of the box, I think we need to live outside of. We just need to just hop on out that box and just kick it to the left. We have to think differently. We have to do differently. We have to think differently. We have to do differently. Like, innovation has to be at the center of the conversation. It needs to be at the center of the work. We are living in an innovation economy, a digital age, and we're on an analog system. Our system, the system by which we support Black and brown entrepreneurs, is completely analog. It's almost like carrier pigeon. And so I think we have to really embrace innovation, like at the heart of it, and unlearn a whole lot and relearn some new stuff. I think we need to embrace equitable models and really educate ourselves on what racial equity means and what racial equity looks like. So we know that the average white child enters the world with 10 times the inherited wealth compared to the average Black child, and 8 times the inherited wealth of your average Latino child, right? 10 times. And so when we're creating these products, right, these financial products, and we are expecting Black and brown folks to check the exact same boxes that people who have access to 10 times the resources are checking, it doesn't make any sense. And when, they're not clearing the hurdles, we're wondering why. They're not coming to the table with access to the same amount of resources. And so moving forward, we need new interventions, new programs, new financial products that are equitable, that factor in the context and the reality that we're facing as it relates to racial inequality.
And I would say, to that point too, another thing that we need is to amplify our stories and our narratives, right? And so, for instance, with our fund, we just celebrated the fact that we were able to lead a $9.5 million Series A round of a company called Care Academy, where at the helm there's a Black woman, Helen Adiosun, who is very committed to, disrupting the home care space, right, around compliance and the pain points that agencies faced in making sure that they are maintaining those standards, right? But what does that mean also for the workers in that space who have to be trained up and who have to actually be on the front lines to care for millions of Americans, right? And even in this COVID environment, what does that mean to their own sanity, to their own personal wealth? wellness in that competing against their own wages. And so we wouldn't have been able to sort of share that story unless we were involved intimately and directly with this particular company and this entrepreneur. And I actually wrote about this in a blog piece that's featured on our website, so folks can check it out. But it really means, not just investing in a Black woman who is upending an industry, but it's also about what does this mean as a watershed moment for the labor of Black women, who we know today, even, you think about where unemployment rates are. For May 2020 numbers, it was celebrated that the unemployment rate was actually starting to go down. But when you look at, particularly for Black women, it was ticking up slightly, and it's now at about 16.5%. So we have to make sure that those who have been historically erased or overlooked or invisible are amplified and seen and shown as large contributors to the economy. And I think that's incredibly important. But I also think that, with that, it takes increased representation of Black people in these spaces to be able to craft those narratives and promote them widely. And so, we have to, even in venture capital, right, you have 1% of dollars, VC dollars going to Black founders, right? And even a smaller percentage of that going to Black women founders. And a lot of it, too, has to do with the fact that we don't have a lot of representation of Black women in this sector. I can't even, tell you what the percentage is of representation of Black females in VC because it's so small. So as we think about how to support, what can we do, it's also about our role to play and also opening or widening, sort of that door, that gate, for more of our folks to come in and be able to be at the table and be able to make decisions and be able to hire folks and be able to cut checks. And I think, as we're able to do more of that, then we can have more of these spaces where we can dialogue with each other. We can dialogue with founders around these new business models that are going to bring in this new future. So just want to leave, that there in terms of things that we can do as individuals to continue to push this work forward.
Yeah, definitely. To Stephanie's point, I think amplifying these stories is critically important. I find it pretty disheartening that I wasn't even aware of that, $9.5 million Series A that they led. Journalists don't care. They don't tend to feature those stories, which is unfortunate because I think an element of why venture specifically has not tended to invest heavily in African-American or just minority-led companies in general is because there hasn't been this many examples of a Black Mark Zuckerberg, if you will. But the reality is I know a significant number of individuals who look like me, who are running significant multi-million-dollar companies and will eventually be billion-dollar companies. But their stories are often not told. And what I'm seeing right now is a lot of, journalists telling the stories of how difficult it is for African Americans. And I think that story is important. But I think what is also equally important, if not more important, is showing the examples of how successful some of these Black-owned businesses actually are. And I think that changes the narrative that these businesses are all that they're all struggling or that they need to be rescued. When the reality is that there's many of them that are really, really, truly thriving. And I think that's important. And when you look at the overall financial landscape, I do think that access to new financial tools and opportunities is critically important because, if that 10-to-1 ratio that was mentioned is true, which it is, it's fact, there is going to need to be new financial tools and resources available. And I think that's really what we're focused on here at Solo, is the fact that we do believe that the FICO score is broken. And we believe that it's not applicable to the underbanked and many minority demographics. And if we only look at that as the baseline for how creditworthy you are, I think that we will continue to be disenfranchised when it comes to different financial resources. So that's a focus of ours, and I think it's critical to the progression.
All right, so it looks like we have time for an audience question. So our listener asks, while Black entrepreneurs and leaders in the small business ecosystem should not isolate, they must insulate in order to shore up the economic health and viability of Black businesses and communities. How can the ecosystem build a cross-sector model of collaboration among Black-led organizations, Black investors, Black businesses, and Black policymakers to build Black wealth from within the community?
I think that's such an important question, and a great question. There needs to be funding. You know, even with all of the announcements that have come down the pike over the course of the last 2 to 3 weeks, and shout out to Sherelle Dorsey in the plug. Like, if y'all don't follow the plug and TP Insights, they are doing tremendous work capturing these commitments. I think there's over 50 million commitments, and the Knight Foundation came through to support their work, but their work is so, so important and so groundbreaking. But all of these commitments are coming down the pike, and there's talk about, you know, entrepreneurs and CDFIs and financial institutions, but very little conversation about the organizations that really support entrepreneurs of color on the ground. There is very little, almost, it's like negligible investment in building out the infrastructure. And that's why I said it's like a carrier pigeon. I wish I had $1 for every time I got an email from someone at a financial institution that said, "Hey, Kelly, do you guys have any members who generate 50,000 in monthly recurring revenue?" And boom, 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 boom. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, maybe 3 or 4. Oh, let me send an email." It's hyper inefficient. The system is hyper inefficient when it comes to deploying resources, capital, education. And so my answer would be, like, we need somebody who's coming with these big dollars to make an investment in the infrastructure that supports the ecosystem. There's a lot of conversation about a pipeline. I've never seen a pipeline that did not exist in a system. They don't hang out in space. And so moving forward, there needs to be major investment in the ecosystem that supports Black and Brown founders if Black and Brown founders are going to thrive.
And that's where we hope the Path to 1555 will also play a role.
Boom.
Yes. So, unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions. Before we wrap up, I'd love to see if there's any last words from each of our panelists before we close. So, who would like to share with us?
I'll just start by saying
they are one of a handful of legacy organizations that are really having the right conversations and advancing the movement and doing the heavy lifting. I have tremendous amount of respect for the team and for Connie. So keep doing it. Shout out.
So I was just going to say, let's not let, there's a role that our private institutions and companies need to play, but we really just can't let the public actors and policymakers off the hook. I think we really need to be pushing for accountability and a renewed focus on Black businesses and Black communities at all levels. It cannot be, we cannot depend on philanthropy or private companies to make the decisions to build our communities. We need to hold our policymakers and our elected leaders accountable for playing their part as well.
I'll say that, I just want to double click on what Kelly talked about in terms of ecosystem builders, the folks who are running co-working spaces, folks who are running accelerator programs, et cetera. Even, economic development agencies and small business support organizations. I mean, they're incredibly critical, to this ecosystem and the infrastructure that we need. These are, all words we've been repeating throughout this discussion. And so I just want to double down on that and emphasize that, and also just, say that I am truly grateful for those out there who are doing that hard work. I see you, and at Impact America Fund, we couldn't do our work without you. So.
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to the other panelists. I think the work that you all are doing is phenomenal. Obviously, AEO for having us and doing the work that you're doing. I just feel like the time is now. I do feel like, there's being more attention being focused on some of these problems. But I think we need to keep everyone accountable, hold private and public companies accountable, hold our politicians accountable, and also hold each other accountable, because we're all doing this work together. And as you see, these people that that are building next to you continue to build, figure out ways that you can be a resource to them. And hopefully they can be resources to you, and we can continue to push this mission forward.
I just want to thank Stephanie, Travis, Kelly, and Akuna for sharing all the wonderful work and insights with us this afternoon. Thank you to AEO for the opportunity and for all that you do to support small businesses and Black-owned businesses. I am leaving this conversation hopeful, but also ready to roll up my sleeves to do the work because I just have so many wonderful partners as we build towards this new vision. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
In the United States today, improving economic equity and opportunity are at the forefront of the national conversation. However, 44 million working households, representing 90 million people, struggle to pay their bills each month. And when it's tough to get by, it's even tougher to get ahead. At the Rockefeller Foundation, we believe we can lift up nearly 5 million low-wage workers by 2025, reducing economic inequality for those that need it most. We're transforming the economic stability and mobility of America's workers by utilizing the levers of public policy and private enterprise. We're also making visible investments in people and places that address the changing needs of the U.S. workforce, while helping to bring investment to low-income communities. For over 100 years, we have stepped up during our country's most critical moments, and we are recommitting our resources to unlock barriers to opportunity and rekindle faith in the American dream. We will continue to work for and with America's workers, facing economic challenges head-on, because everyone deserves the chance to thrive.
This is the dawn of a new era, a new decade, a new beginning, a new opportunity to stand out in a crowded world. To create our new identity, we started by searching for inspiration. We consulted with behavioral psychologists and built a brand that speaks to both the head and the heart. A brand that's open, a brand you can trust, a brand that inspires action. We learned from our teammates. We listened to our clients. We created, we tested, we refined, until we found one clear winner with clients, with teammates, and across all generations. Now, we're ready to share it with the world. Truist, we're opening the door to better financial services, better experiences, better partnerships, better technology, better communities, and a better future. Truist Purple is the color of our merger of equals, rich, bold, and distinctive, yet warm and inviting. Our monogram is made up of two T's that mirror our name and represent touch and tech. Enclosed in a square representing trust, a portal with rounded outer corners that feel secure and accessible. Our logo is designed for all channels, so it's easy to read at every size. Generous letter spacing emphasizes access. The unique leg of the R moves the I from left to right, creating momentum for what's next. Truest. We have the name. We have the look. We have the brand. We have the team. Now, we're ready. We are the future of finance. We are Truest.
Good afternoon. My name is Janelle Williams, and I am excited to participate in AEO's Digital Conference this year. I'm also very thankful that AEO is leveraging its platform to facilitate a really important conversation centered around how do we support Black businesses and really move innovative strategies to lead to more equitable economic outcomes. So very thankful for AEO for doing this. As we know, COVID has created rippling public health and economic impacts across this country, and it's magnified some of the persistent disparities we are seeing. Recent research that came out by Dr. Fairley showed that the number of active businesses within a 2-month period for COVID plummeted by 22%, the largest in record, and Black-owned businesses were especially hit bad, experiencing a 41% drop. I'm excited today to facilitate a conversation with a dynamic panel, really talking about the impact of COVID and the opportunities to support an inclusive recovery. My name is Janelle Williams. I am the Senior Advisor at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. I am joined by several panelists, and I will go through their names and then we'll ask them to introduce themselves further. Firstly, I'll kick it off with Mr. Brian Burnett, founder of Glenwood South Tailors and Alterations. He's also co-founder of Burnett Development, a budding affordable housing and commercial asset firm. I'm also joined by Eric Childs, the owner of Archived Expressions and Mind's Eye Comics. Mr. Sam Nidley, business consultant for Meta, and outside of his work at Meta, he's also the co-founder for Gravity, an organization focused on helping people of color break into the tech startup industry in Minnesota. I'm also joined by Hyacinth Vassell, Vice President of Innovation Engineering at AEO, and Jean Watford, Program Officer for Family Economic Security with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Welcome, panelists, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So we are going to kick off with Brian, and I think it's important that we start with a Black business owner. The reason we're having this conversation today is centered on Black business development, and we really wanted to get your context around how you are experiencing the shifts that are occurring in this market that are COVID related. We know that we're beginning to see a buzz around Black business investment, but do you really think there's a critical mass to diversify Black business revenue lines from B2C to B2B transactions? Can you share with us what are some systemic challenges that need to be addressed for Black businesses, not only to recover, but for them to scale and actively participate in a thriving economy? Thank you, Brian.
Well, first off, Janelle, thank you so much for moderating this panel and having us and having me on the panel as well. So to get directly to your question, I think one of the things to build critical mass is that, Black businesses, operators of Black businesses, founders, we need to have access to real conversations, right? You need to have access to conversations that matter, and I call them conversion conversations. So, for example, by us having a very modest production infrastructure regarding tailoring, alterations, bespoke suiting, we've been approached by a couple enterprise level outfits or companies that want us to produce masks for them. And that's great. We're super, super humbled to be, included in that number, so to speak, and to be approached with that. But what I've noticed is that, the enterprise level company, they need to have enterprise level, demand, enterprise level numbers. And, in a former life, when I was actually in digital technology, I realized that there are certain conversations that are had at the C-suite, and those are the ones that actually determine how other third-party companies actually scale. And so we actually need to have access to the right stakeholders that will not just, take a meeting for the sake of taking a meeting. We need to have access to the people that are going to have conversion meetings. And when I say conversion meetings, I mean meetings that the questions are, these are the numbers, not we'll see if we have space to bring on another employer, right? Because those are conversations, and those are the meetings that actually scale and move businesses forward. So we need to have access to the right people. And that comes from one of your earlier panels where the young lady spoke to having access to the right people outside of necessarily business hours, because we do understand that a lot of business is relationship based. I'm very blessed and very humbled that the enterprise level company that reached out to us, I've been his clothier for about 2 years. And so we actually talk via text. And so not every Black business can actually text, a CEO of $1 billion company and just get introduced from the top. And so that's where it takes the entire business ecosystem. Can't really speak for every company that's enterprise level outside of our market, but being here in Raleigh, North Carolina, it's going to take the Ciscos, it's going to take the Red Hats, it's going to take the channel advisors, it's going to take the Duke Medical Systems to actually get Black business owners in a room, a digital room, and have the conversations about, hey, we see a need and we see you all are trying to grow and scale your companies. How can you help us? And let's get the ball rolling. So it needs to be a conversation where we're already vetted, because I think right now we're showing that we're not playing this time. We're ready for real subsequent and real substantive conversations about converting, getting a PO, but it starts with having the right people at the table that can have conversion conversations, not just casual.
Yep. I really love that frame, conversion conversation. So I'm going to use it moving forward and give you full credit on it, Brian.
No royalties,
but I think this is a great transition for Hyacinth. AEO has done such groundbreaking work around the Tapestry project, and the report that was released, I think by now it's 3 years or so old, but it was really a vital report, really looking at the integration around access to capital, credit, and trust. And I think the role of conversion conversations are strengthened when we do have access to trust and we are able to really build and bridge social capital. So would love to hear further thoughts on what makes this an opportunity moment right now for Black businesses. And can you share a bit around some of the work AEO is doing to help facilitate this shift and really lead with an actionable and accountable agenda?
Sure. So I think what's happening now in our economy with Black-owned business, it's nothing new, right? It's been there. Black-owned businesses have experienced disparity, systematic oppression for a very long time. COVID-19 and the unrest that we're experiencing at this time only amplified it for us. So this amplification provides an opportunity for us to really zero in. And Brian was talking about a conversation. I think the conversations also need to be looked at from a policy perspective, right? And also looking at access to capital. And really taking information, it's not new, it's out there. All the information is out there, all the things that's been happening, it's been there. Now it's the time forever for everyone to now come to the table, all of those who have the platform to do so to come to the table, organizations who are truly interested in seeing Black businesses thrive, to come to the table and not come to the table for a conversation or but to come to the table with actionable items that they're planning to do with the power that they have. So one of the things that AEO is doing, we are looking at how to help businesses. Our response to this is we have our Tapestry Action Lab, as you know. We're doubling down on our Tapestry Action Lab cohorts, which is a cohort that helps the start and growth of Black-owned businesses. And this cohort was started out of the Tapestry report. We are further responded to COVID-19, and we've also created Main Street Rise. In the Main Street Rise, businesses have access to millions of tools and have access to offerings such as digital presence, that's from GoDaddy, mentoring, bookkeeping, that's from Bench, and a host of other offerings that we have here. And in addition, we're also in partnership, if you heard, for those who were part of the conference earlier, we are also in partnership with PayPal and now in the midst of offering a grant with PayPal to help these businesses to respond, shift, and succeed.
That's great, Hyacinth. Thank you for walking us through some of these strategies, and I'm sure we're going to get additional questions from folks who are tuned in and listening. I wanted to shift the conversation a bit to Eric, another business owner, because it's really seductive to really get caught up on these high-level recommendations that They are systemic, let's be honest. They're longer term plays. They require really intentional multi-sector collaboration and some persistence. And I really wanted to hear from you, Eric, if you can walk us through, as a small business owner, what's your most urgent needs? And what is some low-hanging fruit you think is necessary that can be leveraged to minimize COVID's rippling impact on your business today?
So one of the things that I've always had to leverage, a word stuck out to me that you said was persistence. Just business alone is always going to be great challenges, many obstacles. And you have to be passionate about what you want to do and remain persistent in order to overcome any obstacles that are going to be in your way. Another point that adds to that is you have to be able to reach out and start the conversation. I mean, whether it's banks or not, whether or not they want to offer anything to actually help you, or, a lot of times I ran into a situation where people would say, oh, I love your story, I love you, but I don't necessarily think you have the credit, or you don't have the credit in order for us to actually help you. Where I'm in a position where I have a lot of assets, or a few assets, and based on my credit, which I'm not going to go into the circumstances of that, it is systemic, I am denied access to the very assets that I have that I wanted to leverage, because I go to a lot of business seminars and business courses as well as I was pursuing business for myself. And I would hear different business strategies about leveraging assets, leveraging property, doing different things to actually get capital to invigorate your business and expand. And then only to be met with, a little simple thing where they say, well, based on your credit, unfortunately, we can't help you. So when I had to navigate that, one of the things that I found was very powerful was actually speaking direct with my vendors or whomever, and actually letting them know my circumstance and hoping that we could come to some kind of resolve to mitigate the financial challenges to allow my business to continue to flourish. So just in conversation, building my network, constantly getting out there. They have what they call a friends and family network, reaching out to people that trying to surround yourself with other business people that may have the capital to be able to invest in your visions and your business plans. But when you show up, you actually have to be very clear and concise about what it is you're trying to do, what your vision is. And so that people know that, okay, this person's not only just saying they want to run a business, but they actually have the substance here, and I want to get behind that. So when you come to show up to any conversation, you have to be prepared to speak, and not only that, but just to show what your business is. A lot of times people talk about the documentations of a business plan, but you also have to have the sales pitch to go with that. So basically, negotiation has been a huge thing, and persistence has been a huge thing for me to overcome a lot of obstacles. But in business, we continue to have the challenges still facing with banks and trying to get access sometimes to even capital that you may have assets to leverage and still being denied. So.
Thank you for sharing your experience, Eric. And the reality is that there are many stories across this country like Eric, and that's what makes it so systemic, so enduring. And I think this is a great time to pivot to the role of philanthropy in shifting some of these outcomes. And I'm reminded, on the heels of everything that's happening in our country right now, of Dr. King's quote, really saying that philanthropy is commendable, but it must not cause the philanthropist to overlook circumstances of economic injustice which necessitate philanthropy. And so, Jean, I would love to get your thoughts on how could philanthropy really step up in a scalable way to support Black businesses? What's the role of philanthropy really operating as VCs? And how do you think philanthropy coupled with public and private actors can offer transparent, accountable, and sustainable investments to support more equitable outcomes?
Wow, thanks so much, Janelle.
Such an easy question.
Right. Well, I thank you so much first for having me on to talk about the importance and the role that Black businesses actually play in the ecosystem of our communities. And I'm, really excited and honored that I have the opportunity to work with a foundation and community partners that really have this at the heart of our work. We have partners, community leaders, intermediaries who are on the ground, assessing the situations of what's going on, and then advising us this is the appropriate way to support our work. And I think that's really what's important. With the foundation, one of our, basic tenets and philosophies of who we are is that the people who are closest to the work really have the answers. And as a foundation, our role is really to figure out how we can help support that, those solutions. And so we know through our work with AEO that there really are about 3 million, close to 3 million businesses, Black businesses in the US. And as a result of COVID, the numbers that we are now seeing is that maybe 40 to 50% of those businesses won't survive this crisis. We knew that this was that there was a economic crisis for small businesses before the pandemic started. When the Treasury conducted their survey and said that they're rejecting 8,000 applications a day, which created like a $52 billion credit gap. That was only for the top 15 MSAs, okay, the largest cities. And when we had Bain Capital took another look at that and said, if you looked across the entire country, the credit gap really is closer to $130 billion. So now just imagine what has happened since the pandemic, where businesses now who were, had 30, 60, 90 days of cash flow don't have that. And then if they weren't able to get access to the CARES Act, through the CARES Act with the PPP program, that just layered on additional kinds of burdens. And as one of our guest panelists so aptly put it, is that, these small businesses, and particularly Black businesses, are required to have some sort of personal guarantee. So now, in the event that these businesses are running into trouble, they also are at risk of losing their personal assets. And so we think that there's, innovation and a reimagining and work that needs to happen on the ground, not only around impact investing, which is really critical in terms of how we support Blacks and women through venture capital, but also in supporting organizations that are looking at new and novel ideas. The PayPal grant that AEO just recently opened up, and they had such an overwhelming response to that, and the need was there. And when I got the information, there were two things that really impressed me about it. One is that it was tell us what you need, and that businesses actually came back and asked for what they needed, not necessarily the maximum amount of the grant that was available, which allows them to actually share and give additional grants out to businesses. And I think that's the opportunity right here, is that we have to have more trust built in with businesses, and that they will ask for what they need, and we have to find a way to meet them there. And we also have to begin to look at what are the different types of underwriting and lending guidelines that we need, which will support these small businesses. Because if we look at this today and say that, we have close to 3 million businesses that employ close to 4 million people, if 40 to 50% of them are not coming back, that's 2 million jobs that are permanently lost in communities, and those workers have families, and many of them have families with small children. And so that's the cycle that we really are working as a foundation and working closely with other foundations to see how we can further disrupt this cycle.
Thank you, Jean. That's really a thoughtful response. And I'm going to follow up with you on that to drill even further on what are the opportunities to leverage philanthropy to really push private and public sectors as applicable on some of these strategies as well. So we'll follow up on that, but really thank you for your insight. You said something in your comments that really, I think, prepares us for my next question with Sam on underwriting and lending guidelines. And as we think about the business of business and all the inflection points for implicit bias, we really have to interrogate if we want to see more equitable economic outcomes, we need to have an equitable process. So Sam, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do you think CDFIs and MDIs can be leveraged to help facilitate more equitable outcomes. And I'd also love your insight on what shifts would be necessary to make sure the nonprofit intermediary landscape supports more representative and accessible actors and leaders for impactful implementation.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. So to answer the first part of your question, I feel that CDFIs are critical because number one, if we look at the Tapestry report that AEO put out a couple of years ago, one of the things they talked about was the trust gap that Black businesses had with banking institutions due to a history of systemic barriers that they have put in place for Black people who are seeking lending. And with CDFIs are designed to, I can speak specifically about MEDA. MEDA is the Metropolitan Economic Development Association. We're based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We service entrepreneurs of color from all across the state of Minnesota and regionally and nationally as well too. We're also partnered with an MBDA, which is a Minority Business Development Association. We have that housed within our organization, and we were the top performing MBDA center for the last 4 years. And so we're a little bit of a unique situation because of that relationship that we have. But one of the biggest things I wanted to say is that the way our organization worked is that we had the relationship with those entrepreneurs because we provided technical assistance, which is something that a lot of banks don't do. And with that implicit bias that a lot of banks have within their culture, they're not getting to know these entrepreneurs, not getting to truly know their stories. I mean, some banks do. Smaller community banks have done a really good job, and we do partner with those as well too. If we're not able to participate in lending on a client, we will partner with them on that. But I think they're crucial from when the government is deploying money like the CARES Act, like PPP. I think it's important if they want to make sure that we're not forgetting about Black businesses in particular, since that's who we're focusing on in this conversation. A lot of those Black businesses do have relationships with their local CDFIs in their cities. And it's a great way for us to make sure that not only are they going to be able to be helped through that process of applying for the application and also, but once they get the money, how do they manage that money? And that's really what my job was while I was at MEDA, is making sure that my clients have the knowledge, the understanding of how to leverage the funds once they receive it, so that way they can grow and scale their businesses. I think it's crucial that we continue to invest in CDFI so that way they can grow and scale as well too, because I think we need to make sure that the practices that have been put out by banking institutions and lending institutions have been discriminating against Black entrepreneurs for far too long. And I feel that, ironically, with everything going on, if you want to talk about COVID or you want to talk about the current unrest, which, being from Minneapolis, seeing it firsthand with the George Floyd murder, we've seen a lot of businesses locally. We have U.S. Bank headquarters, Wells Fargo headquarters here, have been making statements about Black Lives Matter and how they want to invest in the Black community. One of the things that I think could happen is, from a policy standpoint, working with policymakers and local CDFIs to change some of these policies that have been holding Black businesses for generations, finding ways for us to be able to take out some of the restrictions and requirements that we do see in the underwriting and lending process. Because even in the CDFIs, it can be a challenge sometimes for some of our clients that we're working with. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done, but I think this time has really exposed a lot of things and peeled back that Band-Aid. As the blood has been gushing out, the Band-Aid has still been on and it's been soaked, but now it's completely off, and we have to really treat that wound and make sure that we're focusing on not letting any more infections happen. So I think it's a great opportunity that we're in right now as we're facing some of these challenges we're seeing. It's unfortunate that we've seen some of our businesses suffer the way we have, but with organizations stepping up to provide alternative ways of funding, I think that we have to really sit back and analyze how some of these policies can be changed and for the better.
Thank you for your insight on that, Sam. And it's really telling. And, the feedback so far has really centered around what we know to be true pre-COVID and how COVID continues to magnify these disparities. And so I wanted to shift the conversation just a bit to really reflect on, so what does this mean for recovery? What does it mean for an inclusive recovery, particularly when we see Black-owned businesses continue to be disproportionately left behind, as we see Black-owned businesses overrepresented in some of these industries that are particularly vulnerable to closure with any type of recession. And so I would like to offer an open question to panelists, and feel free to chime in on your thoughts around what investment will really be needed to help Black-owned businesses be positioned to scale in high-growth industries, and in some instances to actually enter high-growth industries, because there are significant barriers to entry in some of these markets. So would welcome your thoughts, and it's an open question for the panel.
If you don't mind, I'd love to take that one first.
Sure.
All right. So as you read my bio, one of the other things that I'm involved in is I'm a co-founder for an organization called Gravity. And we focus on trying to help people of color here in the Twin Cities break into the tech startups industry. And really, one of the reasons why we started that organization was to really try to encourage people of color who maybe have had desires of even starting an app or joining a startup, but felt isolated or left out because the ecosystem, while it was growing here in the Twin Cities, it was very white, and it really wasn't very inclusive when it came to some of the events that were going on and some of the companies that were represented. The cultures within those companies was very actually Eurocentric male patriarchy. So we wanted to create a space for people to have the opportunity to learn from founders and provide a platform also for those founders who had already gone along that journey and struggled through trying to raise money. And some of the issues that we uncovered that people had, especially founders of color, Black founders in particular, is that raising money is obviously going to be the challenging part, right? That access to capital is huge. And in the previous panel, when I was listening in, I know they had some people that were in the VC space and talking about some of the barriers that Black founders have when it comes to raising capital. And I feel like if we can invest in a couple of those earlier stages where I know Eric mentioned that friends and family stage. Well, the challenge with Black founders is that we don't have the same net worth and access to capital from generational wealth that our white counterparts do. So we're not able to go to an uncle or an aunt or mom or dad to get $25,000 for our tech business that we don't know. They don't know if it's going to, blow up or not. So there's some of those barriers there. So looking from a philanthropy standpoint, if we can create pockets of money and funds for those high growth industries that need that realm of funding, because even CDFIs, they're not built that way right now. And I think that's an opportunity for CDFIs to innovate, is to incorporate some funding practices and lending practices that are more equity based, that would allow businesses and those in Black businesses in particular in those spaces to be able to work with the same type of technical assistance they get from a consultant, like at a meter or whatnot, but then also still have more opportunity to raise money in that earlier stage. So that way, when they get in front of a VC who's ready to raise, contribute to like a Series A or a Series B round, they're able to at least develop their application or hire people or do marketing with that friends and family early stage seed funding. And that's a huge gap and a huge opportunity that a lot of businesses face, especially specifically here in our ecosystem, which I've been working with a couple of organizations to try to fill that gap and address those needs.
So I'd like to also add to that as well. In the conversation, there's always talk about access to capital, but I want to make sure what I find is also important, that not only access to capital, but also access to trusted guidance that's coupled with that access to capital. Because too often you'll see businesses who have infusion of capital, and then the infusion of the capital doesn't really support the growth of that business, that is digested into the business, and there is no positive outcome. So I'd like to advocate that not only access to capital be present, but also trusted guidance and also mentorship that is going to help the business to have that blueprint, right, of how to go forward, of what next steps to take, of how do they navigate the different channels of whether it be policy or whether it be trying to get deals and so forth like that. And I think Brian mentioned earlier being at the seat of conversations so that they're able to make decisions, right? And having incubators that are going to support the growth of Black-owned businesses in these sectors, not only at the college level, but also at the high school level.
I'd love to jump in on the tail end of that if I could.
All right, go ahead.
Regarding what we need to is as far as like scaling into being more industries that are high growth and high resiliency, with all these different corporate partners or corporate entities releasing their Black Lives Matter statements or lip service, whatever you want to call it. I think you have to actually hold their feet to the fire and propose some type of connective tissue in between the small businesses and these corporate entities. So something I've been doodling on is for basically some of these companies to adopt adopt a business, right? And so obviously in order for it to scale, it would need to be maybe adopt a Black sector. So for example, let's just pick a random large company like Adobe. Adobe is a multi-billion-dollar digital software and management asset company. They have hundreds of products that scale all across the country, across dozens of languages. So if a company with the scope and reach and resources and policy makers and policy staff, if they decided to sponsor, a couple dozen Black company or 100 Black businesses, and just to wrap their arms around these businesses and say, listen, what we're going to do is we're going to let you all leverage our strategic partners, let you all leverage some of our legacy staff, some of our different types of know-how, best practices, how Adobe scales digitally, and how we create dynamic systems and products and conversion tools across different geographies. If 50 Black businesses had the infrastructure, the lifeblood, the DNA, and had teams across the globe behind them, they would really have no force but to grow. They would literally have no choice but to grow. And the most dynamic part about that is that I didn't mention capital. So what happens is if I give you all of these infrastructure pieces, if I give you great legacy contacts, if I give you phenomenal tech infrastructure, I give you boots on the ground, I give you business development teams, I give you great asset management, phenomenal processes and scopes of works and standard operating procedures. I don't care if you are running a ice cream stand. If I have those types of infrastructure, the money is just the icing on the cake. At that point, it's really hard for me to even mess it up, because I have had a partner, and with all of those things, that encompasses the mentorship, right? That's the mentorship piece that now with the money behind it, now we can do what? We can take care of staff, or we can take care of branding, or we can take care of benefits, things of that nature. I know a lot of times there are a lot of my brothers and sisters there, we are in the service industry, and the service industry has a really challenging time of scaling because you're almost perpetually backed into a corner of being a solopreneur, because you are the mascot, right? And a lot of us never kind of like get out of being the mascot. And when you're the mascot, you're kind of like supplanted in the business, and it's really challenging for you to go up and look down and work on the business versus in the business. And if we have some of these corporate partners, and I'm talking about large companies, that will reach in, lock arms with several hundred or, a dozen Black-owned businesses and say, hey, how can we add value? And then say, all right, we're going to dedicate 20 people to your business a quarter to help your business scale. And we've actually had the benefit of having something at NC State. Something NC State has is something called Consult Your Community, and it was a cohort of children. Excuse me, I apologize. It was a cohort of college kids that they reached out to us, and they're like, hey, what can we help you do? We told them our challenges. There was a due diligence process, and then they came up with strategies and procedures on how they thought our business could and should grow. But of course, those things take capital. So if you reverse that, put it on its head, and you have a large company come in and just say, hey, let's run with you. Let's run with you. And then, by the way, we're going to add some capital to that. That is an actionable, specific way that large companies can actually help Black businesses scale beyond where they are. And the policy comes together, and then all the different dynamics come together that gives us the ability to scale and compete without the capital. The capital is great because we want the capital, but it makes us scale beyond the capital because we have the infrastructure, and that's how you run. That's how you run with the big dogs, in my opinion.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. I'm going to shift quickly to Jean. We have some audience questions coming in. And Brian, be prepared. I'm going to put you on the hot seat to think about how do we incentivize that and hold these companies accountable to make that happen. Jean.
So I think that Brian is right on. Some of the things that we have been looking at and working with different anchor institutions and communities, and they are actually helping these businesses to help prepare them for these vertical supply chain opportunities. And so we have an example like University Hospital, when they built a new 60,000 square foot addition to their center, they hired a Black painter from the community to paint. He had two big challenges. One, getting a bond. Two, was getting a strong enough credit line to get the paint. And they stepped in and they did that for him. And by them doing that, he has been able to actually compete on other large jobs now because they helped build his capacity out on getting a larger credit line, helping him to be able to get a bond so that he could actually do the work. And I think that that is a big role that anchor institutions can play in terms of sharing, not only sharing their expertise, but also their resources, and investing also in as venture capital to Black businesses and communities to help them scale. I think that's a big piece. And then the other thing is that when we begin to look at what does collective ownership look like in terms of helping employees to actually like buy the businesses and create an opportunity and vehicle for them to begin to create wealth, not only individually, but in their communities as well.
Thank you, Jean. So we have a series of questions from the audience, and so I'm going to ask that we get no more than 2 responses from our panelists for these series of questions, because I'd like for us to get through as many as possible. And I'm going to encourage our panelists to be as succinct in your response so that we can really cover the range of issues. And I love these questions, so really I'm ready for us to dive in. First one, how can investors be held accountable to actually funding Black business ventures beyond making a good faith effort?
So I'd say it starts from the fund of funds who are giving them the money, or that there be some rules around, or there be some set aside capital for Black-owned businesses. Because that's where they get it. The funds are coming in from. So wherever they're coming in from, for whether it be from federal or from different entities, that this money have set aside for Black-owned businesses.
And I also think that what's really key to all of these funds that are popping up all across the place is that we do not accept the good faith standard that has been a best practice used against Black businesses and communities, that we hold them accountable and that they need to take every measure possible to get that capital to Black businesses. They need Black people at the table with them in terms of helping them to make decisions about that. They need Black people helping them administer the program. They need people who understand the businesses and the business environment that these Black businesses are working in. And if they don't have a seat at the table, it makes it just that much more difficult for the money to flow through.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to pivot to the next question. I promise, Sam, you will get some time to weave your responses in. Think of Family Feud. First one to hit the buzzer goes, okay? But hold your thoughts, I'm sure, because some of these questions are connected. You'll get to include some of your responses. One question came, the panel mentioned that it's easy to get caught up in high-level solutions that don't solve issues in the short term. How can grassroots and word-of-mouth tactics be leveraged to quickly improve the outcomes for Black businesses? And how can this be done on a broader scale? No one wants to hit the buzzer?
I will take it. I think what we need to look at is there's more power that we have in really combining our efforts. This is a time for collaboration. This is a time for partnership. This is the time when there are businesses that are, for instance, that are doing things that are not supportive of Black entrepreneurship or Black communities, that you refrain from spending your money there, that you utilize the power that you do have. These are little steps that you can do. So if a company is not acting appropriately, then you refrain from purchasing from that company.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I guess this kind of my answer to this question kind of goes along with the previous one. I think there needs to be a new rating structure that we can rate these businesses or investors or funds on their equitable investment spending or whatever it may be, and that's going to be something that weighs in on them, and that's public, that's published, and everybody can see it. I think that's the only way to hold people accountable. I think, and the reason why I think that may be effective in 2020 versus any time before is because we have the internet and social media. And a lot of times when these businesses aren't doing something, look at what happened with Starbucks just a couple days ago. They made a stance on Black Lives Matter, and within a day they reversed their stance because of outcry online. So I think that if we have some kind of a rating structure and we can really have everything out there for people to see how these businesses really truly do invest in entrepreneurs of color or communities of color, or if they're using private prison labor to produce their products. I think we also need to make that public too. It shouldn't be a secret. Then we as a society can dictate where we spend our money, because one of the things that people need to understand is that this country was founded on two principles, which is capitalism and racism, and you can't have one without the other in America. So we need to make sure that people understand that this country works off of how money works, and if we have, especially Black people, we have a lot of buying power in this country, and we spend a lot on consumer goods and different products and services, and we need to make sure that we are knowledgeable and about who is invested in us and who is not. So I think that's one way we can really start to shift how these companies make decisions. And if they don't want to get caught up, they're going to have that representation in the boardroom.
Thank you, Sam. Want to pivot to a question that came for Brian, and someone else can feel free to chime in. But audience wanted to know, what are some concrete strategies to help Black business owners get access to these conversion conversations? How are they connected with people? How do they get access to the introductions from the top? What are some real concrete strategies to get that going?
So thank you for the question. So I'm gonna get real specific. I grew up in the projects of North Carolina, and my first gig out of high school was selling toolkits around downtown Clinton, North Carolina. And what I learned was you have to sell to people that have your solution and not your problem. So one of the main things I see as an opportunity for Black businesses that we cannot be afraid to go up market. Please do not invest in being in the race to the bottom. You have to embrace going upstream. And so we just talked about philanthropy a little while ago. So whether you are detailing cars, whether you are a nanny, or whether you are a hairstylist, focus on the up market. And I say that because once you start doing that as a business person, you start to choose your marketplace, and you start to do something that we call in the tech world, it's called segment. And once you start segmenting and targeting on focusing on people that have your solution, not your problems, then you begin to rewire some of your thinking. And one of the fastest way to rewire some of your thinking is to get around people that have your solution, not your problem. So if you are in a certain industry and you say, hey, I'm going to focus on people that are typically paying maybe around, I don't know, maybe 30, $40 for a car detail. So maybe you triple that and you say, all right, cool. So let's now start focusing on like people that are going to start paying like $150 for getting their car detail. When you start doing that, you start interacting and interfacing with a different type of clientele. That clientele is going to have more resources. That clientele is going to typically have more disposable income, and they're going to typically have more friends like them. What happens is because I'm talking about like how it's going to grow the person, because the business will not grow past the person. So that's what helped us, is that being in the tailoring business and being in the Southeast is that predominantly everyone is used to tailoring services being very cheap or very inexpensive. And so we decided to go premium. And yes, you will lose clients, but what happens is you're actually going to have a higher margin. You're going to do more revenue with less effort and less overhead. And so for a small business, go up market. Think about going to the mid or to the luxury sector, because again, you start interacting with a different type of professional, and then you start having access to different types of insights. And so for me, very selfishly, I say we're going to go premium, because now by focusing on executives and CEOs, those are my clients. And now I can text them and ask them questions. And you can do that as a business owner as well. And for your business, you can say, hey, this is our luxury service. So if you're doing hair, or if you are doing some type of concierge service, you say, hey, this is my tier for executives and CEOs. And then what you start to do is you start to increase your network by increasing your net worth, but you also started increasing your net worth by increasing your network. And that way, that is a real actionable, boots on the ground way that is something you can do today. That's one of the many things that I do and I have done to increase our business and increase our margins, because we need to be able to scale rapidly. Because now is the time to strike while the iron is hot. It is now o'clock. It is time to go. So that's something you can do starting today.
I'd love to hear from Eric as well, his thoughts on how to access these conversion conversations.
Okay, there's two parts of this for me. I want to point out one, when we're talking about the funds that became, or, funds becoming available, right? So we're talking about the funds becoming available, and we were talking about the rules and circumstances around that, like policing those funds once they're in the hands of the small businesses. So I strategically placed a business within a community where I knew they had the expendable capital to develop my business and grow it. And it's not about, what you have, but what you do with what you have, because I work out in the community and promote literacy and advocate for literacy and teach Black history through comics, as well as promoting, enriching kids and getting them in the store in the area where I had the surrounding community that would give me the revenue stream that I needed in order to activate me to actually go work in more diverse sectors. But what I found is sometimes the rules around getting those funds actually redline businesses, saying there's a stipulation that my business actually has to be in a minority dense area where, in order to actually capture those funds. So I wanted to put that out there, that about getting the funds, that we make sure that if we're policing it and giving rules to it, that we give, no matter what business, if it's a minority-owned business, the opportunity to execute on their business plan. Then the second part to this, I wanted to give a little bit of strategy on the ground of what I've actually applied. So one of my businesses you've seen is Mind's Eye Comics. So given circumstances, everything that's happened, the impact of the shutdown of COVID-19, I actually used social media to reverse search LinkedIn. I used that to reach out to industry leaders and creators and artists and let them know the circumstances of the store and actually who I am and what it is that I do. So in doing so, some of these creators actually have reached out back to me, and then using their name to leverage where I can have autograph and signing events in order to drive capital to the store. Because people are, this is an enthusiast market, speculative market. So a lot of these big name individuals, just as Brian said, you got to go upstream. So I just went direct to the people that actually are producing the content and that are the celebrities within my market, just to say, hey, this is what I am, this is what I'm about. Are you willing to be involved? And they didn't necessarily just give me cash, but they did one better. They drove sales to the store. So that's just another strategy. And I thought of that right away when Brian was like, you got to go upstream. And it was just exactly what I did, just reaching out directly to people that are in the industry to overcome certain challenges.
Thank you so much for sharing, Eric and Brian, on recommendations to really get to these conversion conversations. So I can't believe it, but we're actually out of time. And so we're going to go through just a round of final thoughts, comments from the panel. I would be remiss if I didn't try to offer some context to squeeze in some questions we didn't answer. So as you think about your final comments, please consider topics some questions that did come that focused on topics around how could philanthropy really address the perceived risk of Black entrepreneurship and investing in Black entrepreneurship. There was another question on how do we think about supporting Black business in concert with community development, community revitalization. What does that look like? What does that mean? And there are also a follow-up question on what are some policy opportunities to really strengthen the role of CDFIs in the Black business ecosystem. But I really wanted to make sure that we had time to get final thoughts, closing comments from our very dynamic panel. And Hyacinth, I'll ask you to kick it off.
Sure. So I would say one of my final thoughts is that for other companies to take, follow along with what PayPal did. PayPal trusted the businesses to be able to say, what is it we're looking for? How much money do we need? Trust these businesses, because when you give them this opportunity, as we've seen from the Tapestry report, is that trust is very important, and the interplay of credit, capital, and trust will really help these businesses to flourish. And if you really want to help businesses, you have to trust and know that they know what it is they're needing.
Thank you, Hyacinth. Sam?
Yeah, so I guess one final thought that I could say is in regards to a solution that we can have that kind of encompass all the players and what we were talking about. Many of these anchor companies, these corporate companies that are making statements do have foundations that are in the philanthropy space. And what they can do is potentially work with local CEFIs to identify local Black-owned businesses within the community that are looking to either need assistance in funding or also just assist them through providing specific grants that help them achieve ownership of their buildings, right? Which would help generate much more wealth and increase the assets of that business. That would allow us to be able to see these businesses have ownership within the community in a different way. Just having Black-owned businesses in a community is one thing, but having those businesses own the buildings that they're in is a completely different thing that changes the trajectory of that community. So I think that would be a huge opportunity for us to see moving forward, and how we can look differently about how these corporations can step in and really invest in these businesses and in the community. Because a lot of times, a lot of money is dispersed, but we don't really see sustainable results from when money goes out to communities in that way, or it's mismanaged from different organizations that they may get to. But I think that that's a great opportunity for us to see some serious, substantial, and long-term impact.
Thank you, Sam. Eric, do you mind sharing your final comments as a business owner?
Yes, I think as we move forward, one of the things that I would love to see happen is that those gaps be eliminated or reduced when us as minorities, we go to get capital. We have to start breaking down barriers there. Banks need to look at everyone objectively and look at the big picture and the history of a business. If there is history of a business, look at the business plan and allow that to speak for itself. To basically, in my personal opinion, I get analytics, but a cop-out is a cop-out in my personal opinion when somebody just wants to call you on your personal credit. There's many circumstances that impact a person's personal credit. And I just think that when somebody comes in with a solid business plan, comes in with solid revenue numbers, that should speak for itself. And just that gap needs to be bridged.
Yes. Thank you, Eric. Jean?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Janelle, for your thoughtfulness around the questions. And so what I want to say is that I think that there is change afoot in philanthropy. I know most of you read the article the other day where foundations announced that they were going to increase their payouts. And so I think many philanthropic organizations are aware that it's major change that's afoot in communities, and that we need to be good partners in terms of this work. And that, of course, now means like not only rebuilding, but reimagining and thinking about things differently and looking at innovation and ways to ensure that we're more inclusive, and now understanding that those small businesses where you had a cafe or cleaners or someplace to stop after work for a drink with your friend, that those places are an important part of our fabric, and we need to ensure that we have that.
Thank you. And Brian, if you can close off the panel comments.
Yes, so a three-pronged approach. So for small business specifically, if you have not either created a press kit or create a personal website, I've done that at brianburnett.com. And this way you can have a press kit, so that way you can actually promote yourself to these different corporate partners. You go to cnet.com or just Google companies that have pledged money to support Black Lives Matter. You can actually go up there and see the companies that have pledged to support this initiative economically, and then you can hold them accountable, and you have a way to actually market yourself, and you have like a target list of companies that you can hold accountable personally and at the policy level. Secondly, adopting a Black business, I think that is something that every company can do, and the government can incentivize them to do that through whether it's a tax rebate or a tax credit rebate or some type of employee stock type of purchase to incentivize their employees to help the Black business. So that's a way for the Black business to actually do something proactively to get their brand ready for this type of like recognition. At the policy level, the companies can actually do this and actionably actually assist Black businesses by partnering with them, and then the government can help them facilitate this by offering them some type of like tax benefits, tax rate, or tax credit to actually make it worth their time. And I think with something like that, it's always been, and this will definitely make it a win-win for everyone.
Thank you so much. Again, I really want to thank AEO for really pulling us together to have this important conversation. When we think about Black businesses, it goes without saying that they play a vital role in the Black community and for the Black community. Black businesses really came out of necessity. It helped us survive. It helped us stay alive. We want to continue to have these conversations, and we want to think about Black businesses not only in the construct of the necessity of Black businesses, but the opportunity for Black businesses. How do we think about helping Black businesses not just secure income, but create wealth? And we're really, really committed to continuing to have these conversations. And we're really thankful that you've joined us to participate today. I now have the pleasure of making an exciting announcement. Each week, AEO has been giving amazing giveaways courtesy of their sponsors. And this week, I have the pleasure of announcing the winner of an Instapot. The conference team is announcing the winner in the VIP chat right now. And this week giveaway goes to Lawrence Jackson. Congratulations, Lawrence. The conference team will connect with you and give you further details. We are going to pivot to a happy hour virtual networking. I would encourage you to stay on. At this time, I am going to pass the baton on to Corey Briscoe, who has been instrumental to make today's event possible. Corey?
We hope you're not leaving because we have an amazing happy hour planned just for you. After you're done listening to me, click on the left side of your screen and go from stage to networking if you want 10 minutes of speed dating networking something with another conference attendee. Or click sessions on the left-hand side as well, and you'll be able to pick the group or bar that you want to sit at and have incredible conversations. Have too much work to do? Don't worry. We'll see you Tuesday, June 24th for our last week of this amazing conference. Thanks, and remember, small businesses matter.